Hello, and welcome back. Today is gonna be a bit of a different episode. I just passed the 4-year mark since I started the channel, and any day now the channel will be hitting 25,000 subscribers, which, for me at least, is a huge milestone. So before anything else, I just want to thank all of you for being around, supporting me and the channel, giving constructive feedback, and while creating a great community. I probably would have quit making videos a long time ago if it wasn't for the great response that I get from you, my viewers. So I want to sincerely thank you for that. So, to mark this occasion, I will try to answer the most common, general question that I get: how did I end up learning electronics, and what do I recommend to someone just starting off, or someone who wants to make a career in this field? So if you're curious, then keep watching. So, first off, for me, electronics started as a hobby, at a very young age. I learned how to use a soldering pistol when I think I was around 2 or 3 years old, and shortly after I was taught how to turn it on, I learned that the pistol is hot, and it burns. But that did not discourage me. I was highly inspired by my father, who in his spare time would repair various electronics as a side job, since back then, in the early 90s, it was way cheaper to repair something than to buy it new. Taking broken electronics to be fixed was really common back then, and handymen were of course way cheaper than proper repair shops. Since most of this repair work took place at home, I was always around, looking over my father's shoulders, very interested in what he was doing. And as a young kid, I was amazed at how he was able to fix broken stuff. However, as a kid, the most interesting electronics for me were the ones that were able to glow in the dark. So anything with light bulbs or with vacuum tubes. To this day, even though I understand how inefficient and obsolete they are, I still find vacuum tubes mesmerizing. There's just something special about how they glow like a piece of amber, and unlike transistors, the whole component is on display. In a sense, it's like a steam engine. Nothing interesting is hidden away. Now, at this young age, although I was not able to understand the intricacies of electronics, what I did learn was how to solder, and not burn myself. That last bit I'm still learning to this day. So one important thing to mention about learning electronics, especially if you've never tried it, is that it requires a lot of dexterity. Through-hole components are relatively easy to work with, although you still need to take care, but surface-mounted SMD components are a completely different ballgame. I did not work with SMD components until I got a job in electronics, and well, I hated it. The components are tiny, they're a massive strain on your eyes, especially the really small ones, but this is another aspect related to dexterity. You're going to need it, so you should better practice. So if you're just starting off, I highly recommend that you recycle components. Not necessarily because of the price of new components, but rather to grow your dexterity, to learn and observe what a component can go through before it breaks. This will be a valuable skill down the road, and it's best practice with components you don't really care about, and which are already soldered to a recycled PCB or something. Now, actually understanding electronics is a bit of a challenge, and that is what I personally like about it: the complexity and the intricacy of it. My first taste of this was from the old electronics books and magazines I had around. Up until the 80s, electronics, especially radio amateur related, was extremely popular. There was no internet back then, so you had to find something to do. Now, I did not grow up in the 80s, but I did have access to some of these old books and magazines. I did like the idea of radio amateurs, but I was more interested in general electronics. And since at a young age I didn't really know what the words actually meant, I remember thinking as a kid, when I grow up, I don't want to be a radio amateur. I want to be an amateur. Now, a bit later, I think I was in the 3rd or 4th grade, studying the old books, I built the very first circuit that actually worked. A crystal radio. And I was hooked. I mean, it's just a 5-component circuit, but it worked. I guess the big appeal with radio, especially AM radio, is that the circuits are extremely simple. The simple ones at least. But the outcome will keep you amused for hours. I mean, with a 5-component circuit, you can listen to 2 or 3 local radio stations that broadcast day and night, somebody somewhere is talking, and you can listen to it with a device you built all by yourself. Now, in today's world where everybody has an internet-connected smartphone, this seems a bit meh. AM radios have bad audio, no image, and the things they talk about are usually boring. So why even bother? But for me, as a kid, it was the coolest thing ever. Now, after that, I started working with more and more complex circuits. Now, just because I worked with them did not mean that they actually worked. And this was the next important thing for me, trying to understand the circuits. Sure, you can follow a schematic you found somewhere, build it, and hopefully it works, but understanding why it works, and more importantly, how you can improve on it, is the next step. So after I was able to build a functional circuit, the next best thing was to try to improve on it, to somehow modify it, either by combining it with ready-made circuits to form something more complex, or just making small tweaks in an already functioning circuit to change its behavior. This did of course take a lot of trial and error, more error than trial, but it did teach me valuable lessons about how to build, evaluate, and measure circuits. Having a practical feel is critical in electronics, and this is a skill that also needs to be practiced. In high school, I started working with my childhood dream, vacuum tubes, building radio circuits and audio amplifiers. This taught me how painful it is to get electrocuted. So be careful, don't work with high voltages. Anyway, I survived, and here I am today. I eventually got bored with AM radios, and the single tube FM radio I was able to build that actually worked became boring quite quickly too. But building audio amplifiers was far more interesting for me. Next, during university, I managed to find a fixable oscilloscope in the dumpster, and that really opened up a lot of possibilities for me, mainly on measuring and evaluating circuits. It wasn't the best tool, but it was way more than I had before. And I guess the main circuit that I used it on was the Ferriman, which is a very interesting device if you care about oscillators and signal analysis and processing. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, what university did I attend? And what is my professional experience in electronics? University was a long time ago, wasn't it? Well, I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in industrial chemistry and a bachelor's degree in computer sciences. Not a lot of electronics in there. But I have been working in electronics in the automotive industry for almost 10 years now. How did I land this job? Well, I was able to prove during the interview that I know electronics and that I have a practical feel for it. Then, during the trial period, my employer got convinced of this, and well, I stayed with the same company ever since. So one thing you might not be aware of is that when you go to an interview, the main thing that the interviewer is interested in is not how many diplomas you have, but rather, what do you actually know? And if you can use that knowledge for something useful. I guess this is different in different parts of the world, but around here at least, it's not that difficult to get a degree in a technical field. And what that means is that just because you have a degree does not mean you're actually good at the subject that you've studied. So an interviewer will be more interested not in your academic resume, but rather, what do you know? And more importantly, what have you done to apply the things that you've learned about? I'm not necessarily talking about previous work experience, but rather to hobbies related to the field of work. So if you really like electronics, did you actually try to apply it? Now, don't get me wrong, having a degree is important. Don't skip school. In many cases, having the degree is mandatory to get the job. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that just having a degree is not sufficient to succeed in life. You also need an in-depth knowledge of the field that you have studied. You need to put in some effort and some extra work. And you'll need to be able to apply whatever you've learned about. Now, I never claim to know everything about electronics. I do get things wrong from time to time, maybe a bit more often than I should, but I'm still in the process of learning electronics and, well, making mistakes. This is a field where there's always something new and interesting to learn about. And in a sense, I feel like you can never know it all. But trying and getting better is really satisfying. So I keep doing it. In the end, for me at least, one of the most important and interesting things about electronics is just how easy it is to apply and test out the things that you've learned about. You can perform highly advanced simulations using free software, and most generic electronic components cost next to nothing, so it's one of the few technical fields in which applying it and testing can be done at home with minimal investments and minimal personal risks, and the results are observed almost instantaneously. Either the smoke alarm will be going off, or you will be cheering that your device has worked. So if you really like electronics, practice it. Study hard, put in the work to read about it, but then test out whatever you think you've understood. If the circuit works exactly as expected, you got it. If not, then there's a bit more to study and figure out. There is a huge community out there of people involved in this field, from beginners to senior engineers, and usually they will help out if you run into any trouble. So, thank you again for supporting the channel and being around, and see you next time. Bye bye.